All right, so today we're diving deep into the world of art, specifically a painting that sparked a lot of conversation.
Oh, I know the one you mean, the Fighting Temeraire, right? By J.M.W. Turner.
That's the one. And you guys sent in a ton of material for this one. Articles, historical context, even some pretty intense art criticism.
Sounds like we've got our work cut out for us.
We do. So, to set the scene, imagine standing in the National Gallery in London. You're face to face with this massive canvas. What secrets lie beneath its surface? Where do we even begin with a painting like this?
Well, I think to understand the Fighting Temeraire, we need to understand the man who painted it, J.M.W. Turner.
Yeah, he's certainly nicknamed the Painter of Light. But there's got to be more to it than that. Who was this guy?
Well, for starters, he was a bit of a prodigy. I mean, this is a guy who started exhibiting his art at 15 years old.
15? Wow. Okay, so clearly talented from a young age.
Oh, absolutely. And by the time he was 26, he was a full member of the Royal Academy. That's like the ultimate art world seal of approval.
So he was a rock star in the art world. But back to that nickname, the Painter of Light. How does that play out in the Fighting Temeraire?
You see it everywhere. Look at the way he bathes the Temeraire in this almost ethereal, otherworldly glow, while the sun sets in these fiery colors behind it. That's Turner's mastery of light at work.
So for those of us who aren't art historians, what's he doing technically to create that effect?
He used a lot of innovative techniques. One that really stands out is scumbling. It's where you use these thin, broken brush strokes, layering them to create a kind of luminous, hazy effect.
Ah, so it's not just about the colors he chooses. It's about how he applies the paint. It's like he's capturing light itself.
Exactly. And it's a technique that really foreshadowed Impressionism, which came later. Turner was truly ahead of his time.
Okay, so we've got this ethereal, almost delicate light. But the subject of the painting, the Temeraire, it's a warship, right? Pretty powerful one, too.
Oh, yeah. The Temeraire was a 98-cannon beast, a real force to be reckoned with, and she played a major role in one of Britain's most famous naval victories, the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805.
Ah, Trafalgar. I vaguely remember learning about that in history class. Wasn't that a turning point for the British Navy?
Big time. That victory really solidified Britain's dominance at sea for decades to come. It was a huge source of national pride.
So why isn't Turner showing the Temeraire in all its glory? The painting is called the Fighting Temeraire, but it doesn't look very fighting.
Well, there's a reason for that. You see, by the time Turner painted this in 1838, the age of sail was coming to an end. Steamships were on the rise.
So the grand old warships were becoming obsolete.
Exactly. And the Temeraire, despite its heroic past, was no exception.
So this painting is actually depicting the Temeraire being towed to its final destination, the scrapyard. That's a bit of a downer, isn't it?
You're telling me it was a huge deal at the time. For a lot of Britons, it wasn't just about a ship being scrapped. It was a symbol of an entire era coming to an end.
Ah, I get it. That sense of nostalgia, of a glorious past fading away. I bet that resonated deeply with people, especially someone like Turner, who seemed to be so patriotic.
Absolutely. He was known for his love of the sea and his pride in Britain's maritime history. So seeing this grand old warship, a hero of Trafalgar, being reduced to scrap, it must have hit him hard.
Okay, so the context is starting to make sense. But let's zoom back in on the painting itself. You've got this almost ghostly Temeraire juxtaposed against this tiny, dark tugboat. It's a pretty striking contrast.
It is. And then there's that sunset blazing away in reds and oranges. It's not just the end of a day, is it? It feels like something more symbolic.
Yeah, like the symbolic end of an era. Maybe even a hint at Turner's own mortality. After all, he wasn't a young man when he painted this.
That's a good point. He was in his 60s at the time, and his own career was winding down. So yeah, maybe there's an element of reflection on time passing, on the inevitability of change.
And yet there's something so vibrant, so alive about the painting. It's not all doom and gloom.
You're right. There's a beauty in the way he captures the fading light, the reflection of the water, the smoke billowing from the tugboat. Even in decline, there's a certain grandeur to it all.
I'm looking at some of the historical details you guys send in, though, and it seems like Turner took some liberties with the actual event. I mean, the Temeraire was missing its masts when it was towed, right?
That's right. It had been completely dismasted before the tow.
And there were 2 tugboats involved, not just one.
Yep, 2 tugboats. But Turner chose to simplify the scene, focus on one tugboat pulling this grand old ship.
So was he just being lazy, or was there a reason for those changes?
Oh, I don't think it was laziness. Turner was very deliberate in his choices, and those seemingly small details, they actually play a big role in shaping the painting's message.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Well, for starters, by omitting the masts, Turner emphasizes the Temeraire's vulnerability. It's this once mighty warship stripped of its power and grandeur, being literally dragged along by this little tugboat.
I see what you mean. It creates this stark visual contrast. The powerful ship reduced to a helpless hulk.
Exactly, and by showing only one tugboat, he further emphasizes the Temeraire's isolation. It's like it's being pulled almost reluctantly into this new era, an era it no longer belongs to.
So those inaccuracies, they actually add to the painting's symbolism.
Exactly. Turner wasn't just trying to create a historically accurate depiction. He was using artistic license to enhance the drama, the emotional impact, the layers of meaning.
And it's working. I mean, just looking at this painting, you can feel the weight of history, the bittersweet feeling of a glorious past fading away. But there's also a sense of awe, of beauty, even in the face of the line.
You're getting it. And that's the genius of Turner. He could take a simple scene, a historical footnote, and turn it into this powerful meditation on time, progress, and the human condition.
This is just the tip of the iceberg, isn't it? There's so much more to unpack here.
Oh yeah, we've only just scratched the surface. Buckle up. This is going to be a deep dive.
All right, then, let's dive deeper. What other secrets lie hidden within Turner's masterpiece? So we've talked about how Turner played with historical accuracy to emphasize the Temeraire's vulnerability and isolation. But there's one detail that keeps bugging me, that white flag. It's not the Union Jack the Temeraire would flown. What's the deal with that?
Yeah, that's a fascinating one. The white flag, well, we usually associate it with surrender.
Right, giving up.
But it can also represent a truce, or even a signal for parley, a desire to communicate.
So maybe it's not about the Temeraire giving up entirely, but about transitioning into a different phase of its existence. It's not being destroyed in battle, it's being repurposed, even if it's for scrap.
That's a really interesting interpretation, and it ties in nicely with what we were discussing earlier about Turner's own feelings about his stage of life.
You mean how he might have seen himself in this aging warship, facing his own mortality?
Exactly. He was nearing the end of his career, but maybe instead of seeing it as an ending, he saw it as a transition, a movement into a new phase, leaving a different kind of legacy.
That actually makes a lot of sense. It's like how some cultures view aging not as a decline, but as a step into a new stage of wisdom and respect.
Yeah.
Okay, but turning back to the art itself, one thing that really strikes me about the Fighting Temeraire is Turner's use of color. It's so vibrant, yet also somehow muted and melancholic at the same time. How did he achieve that?
It's all about his technique. Like that scumbling we talked about, it creates this luminous effect that almost makes the paint itself glow. And then there's his understanding of light and shadow, the way he blends those warm oranges and reds of the sunset with the cooler blues and grays of the water and the sky. It's just masterful.
It really does feel like you can almost feel the warmth of the setting sun just by looking at the painting. And the water, the way he captures the movement of the Thames, the ripples and reflections, it's so realistic.
He had this incredible ability to capture the essence of the sea, and yet there's also this dreamy, almost ethereal quality to it, which adds to that sense of the Temeraire being this ghostly presence from a bygone era.
It's like he's blurring the lines between reality and memory. Okay, so we've talked about the historical context, the symbolism, the technique. But what about the public's reaction? Did the Fighting Temeraire become an instant classic?
Well, not exactly. It's funny because while Turner himself considered it one of his most important works, he even refused to sell it at one point. Some critics initially found it a little too abstract, too unconventional.
Really? I mean, today it's considered one of the most iconic British paintings of all time. People voted it their favorite painting in a BBC poll a while back.
I know, it's crazy to think about, right? But back then, people weren't quite ready for Turner's innovative style, that bold use of color and light, the way he pushed the boundaries of traditional landscape painting.
He was ahead of his time, a true visionary.
Absolutely. But as people started to understand and appreciate his genius, the Fighting Temeraire became this powerful symbol, not just of British naval history, but also of art's ability to transcend time and capture these moments of change.
And that legacy continues to this day. I mean, think about how often you see this image reproduced in books, on posters, even on banknotes. Speaking of details, there are all these little elements in the painting that we haven't really touched on yet, like those birds circling overhead, or the tiny figures on the deck of the tugboat. They seem almost insignificant at first glance, but I bet they add another layer to the story.
Oh, absolutely. Those details are crucial. Take those birds, for example. Some art historians believe they represent the souls of the sailors who died on the Temeraire.
Wow, that gives me chills. It's like they're being released from this earthly vessel, taking flight into the sunset.
And then there are those tiny figures on the tugboat, so small compared to the grandeur of the Temeraire. Almost like Turner is reminding us that even amidst these huge historical shifts, there are always these individual human stories unfolding.
It's like he's saying, yes, this is a moment of great change, but life goes on even for the people who might not even be aware of the historical significance of what they're witnessing.
Exactly. They're just doing their job, sailing that tugboat, completely unaware that they're playing a part in this grand historical drama. It's a fascinating juxtaposition. On one hand, you have this majestic warship, a symbol of a bygone era, and on the other hand, these almost anonymous figures representing the everyday lives that continue even as the world around them changes.
It's a reminder that history isn't just about dates and battles and famous figures. It's about the countless individual lives that get caught up in the currents of time. Okay, so we've talked about the ship, the symbolism, the artistic techniques, the public's reaction. But I'm curious about the people who were actually on board the Temeraire during that final journey. What was it like for them to witness this once mighty warship being towed to its demise?
Unfortunately, we don't have any detailed first-hand accounts from the sailors themselves. I mean, imagine keeping a blog back then. But we know from historical records that there was a skeleton crew on board responsible for maintaining the ship during the tow.
I can't even begin to imagine what that must have been like for them. To say goodbye to a ship that had been their home, their protector, a symbol of their service.
It must have been a really complex mix of emotions. Pride in their service, sadness at the ship's fate, maybe even some anxiety about what their own futures held, because they were essentially saying goodbye not just to a ship, but to a way of life.
It's a poignant reminder that sometimes progress comes at a personal cost, and those individual stories, even though they might be lost to history, add another layer of meaning to the Fighting Temeraire. It becomes more than just a painting about a ship. It becomes a painting about people, about the human experience of change and loss.
And it reminds us that those themes are just as relevant today as they were back then. I mean, think about the rapid technological advancements we're experiencing right now, the way our world is constantly changing. It's easy to get swept up in it all and forget about the human cost.
Yeah, the feeling of being left behind, of things moving too fast.
And that's what makes the Fighting Temeraire so powerful, I think. It makes us pause, reflect, appreciate what we're losing, even as we embrace the new.
So as we move into the final part of our deep dive, I want to shift our focus to the legacy of the Fighting Temeraire itself. It's become more than just a painting. It's an icon, reproduced countless times.
Oh, yeah. It's become this symbol of British history, of naval power, of the shift from sail to steam.
But it's also something more universal, isn't it? This meditation on change, on loss, on the beauty that can be found even in decline. It speaks to us across time and cultures.
Exactly, and it's not just about looking back with rose-tinted glasses, it's about acknowledging that change is a constant, right?
It is, and I think that's why the Fighting Temeraire continues to resonate with people today. We're all facing our own Temeraire moments in a way. Those times when we have to let go of something we hold dear, whether it's a job, a relationship, a way of life.
It's that bittersweet feeling, recognizing the beauty of what's passing, but also understanding that it's time to move on.
And sometimes even embracing what's new, even if it's a little scary.
Exactly. It's like embracing the tugboat, even though you might miss the grandeur of the sailing ship. Okay, picture this. You're standing on the banks of the Thames, the sun is setting, and you see the Temeraire drifting by, just like in the painting. What are you feeling?
That's a good one, I think. I'd probably feel a sense of awe, first and foremost. Just looking at this grand old ship, knowing the history it represents, the battles it's fought.
Yeah, there's definitely that sense of history of something larger than yourself.
But also I think I'd feel a touch of sadness, knowing that its time is coming to an end, that it's being towed away to be dismantled.
It's that bittersweet feeling again, isn't it? Beauty and loss intertwined.
It is. But there's also something almost hopeful about it, too. Like, the sun is setting on this era, but it's also rising on a new one. And even though we might not know what that new era holds, there's a certain excitement in that uncertainty.
Absolutely. It's about finding beauty and meaning in every stage of life, even the ones that might seem like endings.
Well, I think we've done a pretty good job of dissecting the Fighting Temeraire today. We've explored the history, the symbolism, the artistic techniques, and even the emotional impact it continues to have on viewers centuries later.
And we've barely scratched the surface. There's always more to discover with a painting like this.
That's the beauty of great art, isn't it? It keeps giving, keeps inspiring new thoughts and interpretations. So as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with a final question to ponder. What does the Fighting Temeraire evoke in you? Is it nostalgia, awe, melancholy, maybe even a sense of hope?
Whatever it is, let those feelings linger. Let them spark conversations, inspire you to explore more art, to delve deeper into history, to contemplate the ever-changing world around us.
And until next time, happy diving.